They called him the Fortunate, not because he led great wars, but because he inherited an empire already in motion and raised it higher than any before him. During his reign, Portugal sailed beyond every horizon. It gave new worlds to the world. And in Lisbon, a golden throne rose, surrounded by seas and maps. Yet within the brilliance of his crown, shadows lay hidden. The same king whose embassies dazzled the Pope also expelled, in the name of faith, those who for centuries had helped build the kingdom. This is the story of King Manuel I, the man whose reign spanned oceans and continents, and in doing so forever shaped the destiny of Portugal. The year was 1495. The kingdom mourned the death of its king, Dom John II. The perfect prince had died without a direct heir. His only son, Prince Afonso, had perished years earlier in a tragic riding accident. In the shadow of grief and silence, the crown of Portugal looked for a new heir. Then came Dom Manuel, Duke of Beja, brother to the widowed queen, and cousin to King John II, born in 1469 in the town of Alcochete. His path to the throne was anything but certain. Grandson of King Duarte, until then just another discreet noble of the House of Avis. He had no military past and showed no visible ambitions, a name outside the predictions, but within the royal bloodline, named heir by the will of King John II, a decision that would shape the kingdom's destiny. His acclamation took place on October 27, 1495 in Alcácer do Sal. There Dom Manuel swore to protect the faith and to continue the path of expansion. With the royal mantle on his shoulders began the reign of a man who would soon be called the Fortunate One. And from the very start of his reign, it seemed that the winds of the world blew in his favor. He was young and he had faith, and he inherited the boldest plan of expansion ever dreamed by a Portuguese king. Soon his name would match his destiny. Dom Manuel inherited more than a throne. He inherited a vision. The Joanine plan to reach the East by sea was already in motion, and it would now fall to the new king to turn it into a lasting reality. It was under his reign that Vasco da Gama reached India in 1498, and in 1500 Pedro Alvarez Cabral reached the shores of Brazil. But Portugal's gaze was not fixed solely on the east. Between 1501 and 1502, the brothers Gaspar and Miguel Corte Real explored the northwest Atlantic, possibly reaching the shores of modern-day Canada. These were risky voyages wrapped in mystery, but they confirmed the global ambition of Dom Manuel's reign. At the same time, Portuguese strongholds rose, stone by stone, from the shores of Africa to the spice-laden ports of Asia, reaching deep into the heart of the Indian Ocean. And in those formative years, few shone brighter than Duarte Pacheco Pereira, the Lusitanian Achilles, who in 1504 heroically defended the city of Cochin with only a handful of men against thousands of enemies. His resistance became legendary, a testament to a nation's courage, forged at the dawn of the Eastern Empire. Then came Francisco de Almeida, the first Viceroy of India, entrusted with cementing Portuguese dominance in the Indian Ocean. And in his wake rose Afonso de Albuquerque, the brilliant strategist hailed as the Lion of the Seas, who secured Goa, Malacca, and Hormuz with a firm hand and imperial vision. Trade routes became realms and the seas the dominion of Portugal. Lisbon became the beating heart of the known world's commerce. Gold, spices, and the exotic treasures of the East filled the royal coffers, and wealth poured into stone and splendor into the Hieronymus Monastery and the Tower of Belém, the watchtower of Lisbon's golden age, symbols of a time when faith, power, and architecture were woven into a single design. The wealth that flowed into Lisbon did not shine only in gold or jewels. It carved itself into stone. It rose in towers and cloisters where faith and empire became one. Under his reign, Portugal's art found its voice. It was bold, it was intricate, and unmistakably its own. a face the world had never seen before. The Manuel I style, a fusion of late Gothic with the symbols of the discoveries. Stone became rope. The cross of the Order of Christ bloomed in relief. Coral shapes curled into the walls, and the armillary sphere watched over all. Every detail a statement of faith and power. At its heart stood the armillary sphere, Dom Manuel's personal emblem. It symbolized the world and Portugal's mastery over the seas. It appeared on coins and royal banners and across facades and portals. And centuries later it would still stand, emblazoned on the flag of Portugal. In Rome, the splendor of the Portuguese kingdom impressed even Pope Leo X. In 1514, the embassy sent by Dom Manuel I paraded through the holy city with more than 100 men, among them a white elephant, a Persian horse, and gifts of incalculable value. At that time, Portugal had risen into a power whose reach spanned the globe, with kings, realms, and pontiffs recognizing its supremacy at sea. But glory came with blood, and the East gathered its storm. In 1509, the ocean became a battlefield. Commanding the fleet was Dom Francisco de Almeida, steering it toward battle. He faced a powerful Muslim coalition. Mamluks from Egypt, Ottomans, the Sultanate of Gujarat, and Indian allies, supported by Venetian mercenaries. The Battle of Diu was brutal and decisive. Cannon fire roared for hours. Smoke veiled the horizon, and the sea turned red with the wreckage of war. With only 18 ships, the Portuguese destroyed more than 200 enemy vessels and annihilated the alliance that threatened European dominance in the East. It was an epic victory, and with it Dom Manuel I sealed Portugal's hold over the Indian Ocean and consolidated an empire that no other European king had dared to imagine. Dom Manuel's reign was not only written on the waves. While naus crossed oceans, flags rose in Goa and in Sofala. Monsoon lanes carried the routes to the Moluccas, to Timor. Meanwhile, on land, the king worked to shape the realm itself. One of his main priorities was the reform of the forais, the ancient contracts between the crown and the towns. Thousands of these documents were reviewed, corrected, reorganized. A monumental effort to make the kingdom's administration fairer and more uniform. In law, the Manuel I ordinances, the kingdom's law code fully revised and set in print, replaced the Alphonsine Code and strengthened central rule. It unified the kingdom's laws and laid the foundation for a centralized state. A true bureaucratic machine emerged. Officials paid by the royal treasury, more efficient courts, and an administrative network that carried royal authority into every town, city, and port of the realm. Even in technical measures, like the standardization of weights and measures, Lisbon became the national reference, shaping Portugal, united, modern, and worthy of respect. In education, he strengthened the general studies and created scholarships, knowing that an empire needed not only swords but also minds. And although much of this was inherited from earlier reigns, under Dom Manuel, these reforms would at last take their full shape. Behind the majestic image of the monarch dressed in brocade stood a political strategist and skilled administrator, able to unite nobility, clergy, and merchants around a common ideal, the greatness of the kingdom. Over nearly 3 decades of reign, King Manuel I saw an empire of unprecedented scale rise around him. He was now recognized by kings and by pontiffs. By the early 1500s, Dom Manuel adopted a new royal title, one of the longest in European history. King of Portugal and the Algarves of this side and beyond the sea in Africa, Lord of Guinea, of the conquest, navigation, and commerce of Ethiopia, Arabia, Persia, and India. He was, in essence, the king of the discovered world. But no empire endures on brilliance alone. Gradually, the gold of the East also brought greed and internal tensions, pressure from the nobility, disputes between viceroys and captains, instability in the new conquests. All of it eroded the appearance of order. In 1497, conversion was decreed, the Jews first, the Muslims under growing pressure. It was, in part, the price of his marriage to Princess Isabella of Aragon and Castile. Thousands were forced into baptism, others left. Those who accepted baptism came to be known as New Christians, a name born of royal decree, one that would carry weight and stigma for generations. Marked in law, in commerce, and in the eyes of society, culture and science paid a human price, even as the spice trade swelled the royal coffers. Later in his reign, negotiations with Rome began. The Inquisition would only take root under Dom John III, his son. In that harsher climate, the court darkened, favor over merit, intrigue over service. Even Afonso de Albuquerque fell from favor. So did Duarte Pacheco Pereira. After years at sea and no hearing for a westward route, Ferdinand Magellan left for Castile. The voyage that would circle the earth sailed under another flag. In the end, Dom Manuel seemed more a conciliator than bold, more a caretaker than a conqueror. In his final years, he immersed himself in symbolism and ceremony. He married 3 times, the last to Eleanor of Austria, sister of Charles V, and he sought to ensure a smooth transition to the throne. He died in 1521 in Lisbon at the age of 52. He was buried in the Geronimos Monastery, the greatest monument of his reign. With him, a golden chapter closed, and a new stage began with new doubts. New kings would follow. New paths would open. Dom Manuel was not a king of the sword. He ruled with counsel and caution, not with steel. But he built an empire with maps, treaties, and silent decisions. Under his reign, Lisbon became the heartbeat of a changing world. Now set sail with the crosses of the Order of Christ. They returned with spices, treasures, and new routes on the horizon. He was the king of an age when the impossible seemed within the reach of the sails. From Lisbon's helm, the kingdom spanned 4 continents and crossed almost every ocean. It raised fortresses, built churches, shaped laws, and sailed to places no European had ever reached. Yet for every port gained, a culture was silenced. For every palace lit, a shadow grew. The story of Dom Manuel is like the expansion itself, both grand and ambiguous. Faith and fire, gold and silence, political genius, and decisions that would echo for centuries. By the time he died, Portugal stood as a global empire. But it was already a realm divided between splendor and unease. In the end, his truest legacy was this: to show how far a kingdom could reach and how high it could rise, to remind us that every empire casts a shadow as vast as its light. In that shadow lies the true cost of greatness. This was the age of Dom Manuel I, the fortunate,